Scroll through your social media feed for just 10 seconds. Faces appear, disappear, smile, pose, ask silently to be noticed. Now pause and think about the one person you know who never posts their photo. No selfies, no profile updates, no carefully chosen angles, nothing. The question is not why they are missing, but why their absence feels so loud. In a world where visibility has become a form of existence, choosing not to be seen feels almost rebellious. It triggers curiosity, assumptions, even suspicion. Are they hiding? Are they insecure? Or are they simply ahead of something most people haven't yet realized? Psychologically, this silence is not empty. It is full of meaning. When someone resists the urge to display their face to the public, they are quietly stepping out of a system that trades identity for attention. They are declining an invitation that most people accept without question, the invitation to turn the self into content. And that decision, whether conscious or intuitive, reveals far more about the human mind than 1,000 filtered images ever could. What if not posting a photo isn't a lack of confidence, but a surplus of it? What if the need to be seen is not strength, but dependency? And what if the people who remain invisible online are not disconnected, but deeply anchored within themselves? To understand this, we must look beyond screens and into the psychology of identity, validation, and the quiet power of choosing not to perform. When a person does not rely on posting their image online, it often reflects a deeper psychological orientation toward internal identity rather than external validation. Internal identity is formed through self-reflection, personal values, lived experiences, and a consistent inner narrative. It does not fluctuate with praise or criticism. These individuals tend to ask themselves, do I respect who I am, instead of do others approve of me? From a psychological standpoint, this reduces emotional volatility because self-worth is not constantly negotiated in public spaces. External validation, on the other hand, depends on feedback loops, likes, comments, views, and reactions. While this can feel rewarding in the short term, it conditions the mind to associate worth with visibility. People who step away from this system often do so not because they lack confidence, but because their identity is already anchored. They experience less anxiety about being evaluated and less pressure to maintain a curated version of themselves. Their self-concept remains intact even in silence. Clinically, this internal orientation is associated with stronger emotional regulation and autonomy. When identity is internally governed, approval becomes optional rather than necessary. The person knows who they are even when no one is watching, and that psychological independence quietly shapes how they move through the world, calm, self-directed, and less reactive to external judgment. For many individuals, privacy is not secrecy, it is psychological safety. Choosing not to post personal photos can be a deliberate way of protecting the emotional self from unnecessary exposure. From a clinical perspective, visibility activates vulnerability. Once an image is shared, it becomes open to interpretation, judgment, comparison, and even misuse. For people who are emotionally aware or highly perceptive, this constant openness can feel mentally taxing. Privacy, then, becomes a stabilizing boundary rather than a wall. Psychologically healthy boundaries allow a person to decide what enters their emotional space and what remains personal. When someone limits visual access to themselves, they are often exercising control over how much of their identity is externally accessible. This is especially common in individuals who value depth over breadth in relationships. They may prefer being truly known by a few rather than superficially seen by many. From a therapeutic lens, such behavior often reflects self-respect and emotional maturity. The person recognizes that not every part of the self needs an audience to be valid. Their sense of safety comes from containment, the ability to hold parts of themselves privately without pressure to explain or display them. In an era where oversharing is normalized, protecting privacy can be a quiet form of self-care. Some individuals naturally gravitate toward the role of observer rather than performer, and this orientation is deeply psychological. Social media platforms subtly encourage performance, posing, narrating life, and shaping moments for public consumption. People who choose not to post their photos often step out of this dynamic. Instead of asking how they appear, they focus on what they notice. Their attention is directed outward in a reflective way, not outward for approval. From a clinical viewpoint, observers tend to have higher introspective capacity. They process experiences internally before expressing them, if they express them at all. This does not indicate passivity or detachment. Rather, It reflects a preference for understanding over being understood by the masses. They are more comfortable witnessing life as it unfolds than interrupting it to document proof of participation. Psychologically, this reduces pressure. The performer must constantly manage impressions, while the observer is free to experience emotions without packaging them. Observers often develop stronger emotional regulation and deeper insight into human behavior because they are not preoccupied with self-presentation. Their sense of presence is quieter but more grounded. In many cases, they are fully engaged with reality, even though they leave little digital evidence behind. The act of posting photos on social media is closely tied to the brain's reward system, particularly dopamine release. Each like, comment, or view provides a small neurological reward, reinforcing the behavior and encouraging repetition. Over time, this can condition the mind to associate self-worth and pleasure with external feedback. Individuals who avoid posting their photos often show a reduced dependence on this reward loop. Psychologically, they are less driven by instant validation and more comfortable with delayed or intrinsic rewards. From a clinical perspective, this suggests greater tolerance for emotional neutrality. These individuals do not require constant stimulation to feel satisfied or motivated. Their dopamine regulation is often linked to activities such as learning, mastery, meaningful work, or deep interpersonal connections rather than public affirmation. This can result in more stable mood patterns and less anxiety related to comparison or performance. Importantly, reduced dopamine dependency does not mean a lack of enjoyment or ambition. It reflects a different wiring of motivation. The person is less reactive to external cues and less likely to chase approval as a source of emotional energy. In an environment designed to exploit attention and reward-seeking behavior, choosing not to participate can be an unconscious act of psychological self-preservation and long-term emotional balance. When someone chooses not to post their photos on social media, society often rushes to explain the absence with assumptions rather than understanding. Silence is frequently interpreted as insecurity, social anxiety, or lack of confidence. From a psychological standpoint, this reaction reveals more about collective norms than about the individual. In a culture where visibility is equated with relevance, opting out is seen as abnormal, and anything unfamiliar tends to be pathologized. Clinically, this misinterpretation stems from projection. People who rely on external affirmation may unconsciously assume that everyone else does too. As a result, they read invisibility as fear, when it may actually represent autonomy. The mind tends to judge others through its own motivational framework, overlooking alternative psychological orientations. This misunderstanding can place subtle social pressure on individuals to perform, explain, or justify their privacy. Yet psychological health does not require constant self-disclosure. Confidence does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it is expressed through comfort with being unseen. The absence of self-images can reflect clarity of self, not confusion. Recognizing this challenges a deeply ingrained belief that to exist meaningfully one must be observed. In reality, many psychologically grounded individuals experience their strongest sense of self precisely when they are not performing for an audience. In the end, the choice not to post one's photos is not a statement of absence, but of intention. It reveals a relationship with the self that does not require constant reflection from a screen to feel real. In a culture that rewards exposure and confuses attention with worth, choosing privacy can be an act of quiet psychological strength. It takes self-trust to remain grounded without applause, and emotional maturity to resist turning identity into a performance. Not every mind is built to seek validation in public spaces, and not every healthy psyche needs to be seen to feel secure. Some people are constructing their lives inwardly, developing depth, regulating emotion, and preserving meaning beyond metrics. Their confidence is not loud, their presence not advertised, yet their sense of self remains intact. Perhaps the most important reminder is this: visibility is a preference, not a requirement for psychological health. When we stop equating silence with insecurity, we allow a fuller understanding of human complexity. Sometimes, the strongest individuals are not the ones who show themselves the most, but the ones who know who they are, even when no one is watching.